Om. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, 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 and thy blessed beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good Saturday afternoon. Welcome to our reading and discussion of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as offered to us by Swami Prabhavananda and Christopher Isherwood in their book, How to Know God. As we see from the title, Swami Prabhavananda clearly recognized that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are a workbook for stilling the thought waves of the mind and achieving self-realization or knowledge of the Atman. So that's what we're studying. We're well along in the book. We're in the third chapter, the chapter on powers. Our reader, thank you, Jeff, will let us know where we are. And but before we go ahead, are there any comments or any concerns or questions that remain from our prior readings and discussions? Sometimes things come up after a class when you're contemplating what's been studied. So if anything of that kind has come up, please do bring it forward. This is, after all, a class, not a lecture, either by Swami Prabhavananda or by Patanjali or by me. So anything at all from anyone. All right, Jeff, then please tell us where we are in the book, and we'll ask you to start the reading.
Well, Brother Shankara, like you said, we're in chapter 3, which is entitled Powers. In the book that most of us have, we are on page 204, and we're about to take up Sutras 40 and 41, which are grouped together. Sutra 40.
No, go ahead.
Sutra 40. By controlling the nerve currents that govern the lungs and the upper part of the body, the yogi can walk on water and swamps or on thorns and similar objects, and he can die at will. So repeating Sutra 40, by controlling the nerve currents that govern the lungs and the upper part of the body, the yogi can walk on water and swamps or on thorns and similar objects, and he can die at will. And Sutra 41, by controlling the force which governs the prana, he can surround himself with a blaze of light. Repeating number 41, by controlling the force which governs the prana, he can surround himself with a blaze of light. This is the force which regulates the various functions of the vital energy, or prana. One of the brother disciples of Sri Ramakrishna actually had this power. and it is recorded that he once used it to light the path for Ramakrishna on a dark night. However, Ramakrishna later found it necessary to take the power away from him because it was making him dangerously egotistic. And that concludes the commentary.
Okay, this business of being able to walk on water or thorns or similar objects, we see this in demonstrations of walking on nails, lying on nails, and this ability to die at will. Well, certainly die and resurrect themselves at will, come to that. And certainly we see in the stories that are told of Christ that he walked on the water, that he left the body at will, saying, with the body saying, "Oh, my Lord, why have you left me?" But the spirit had left the body. And then, of course, he resurrected himself at will. There are also demonstrations in yogic literature of people doing these things. There's a little book by Hamid Bey, Hamid Hamid Bey, about the teachings of the Egyptian mystery temples. And one of the things that they would do as a test of their yogic powers was be buried for 3 days, buried alive. And if they were still able to resurrect themselves from that death, then they had achieved. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna, as we just read, discouraged the use of these powers because, as it was said of the one who had this power and one of his direct disciples, it made that person dangerously egotistic. And this is the danger. What does it mean to be egotistic? It means to satisfy yourself, satisfy your desires, to do things on behalf of yourself, whether it be carnal lust, active greed for money, or their analogs in all manner of desires. We see what it leads to in the Star Wars epics, where we see Darth Vader and the other Sith, including the Emperor himself, having these great psychic powers. So this is part of the mythology that George Lucas, under the tutelage, now he's gone out of my mind, Joseph Campbell, under the tutelage of Joseph Campbell, this mythology that was created about these yogis on both the positive and negative side, the Jedi Knights and the Sith Lords of the dark side.
Yes, I was wondering about that. It a lot of dialogue that tells you that these powers are necessary in order for a higher evolution of the soul. And then I was seeing, well, in this class we were talking about, you shouldn't want to have them, and I was wondering why. And it came to me that maybe this is one of the reasons why you need a teacher, someone to monitor you, to be able to keep you from in order allowing you to have these powers, but to keep you from going into that egotistical state, because we can't see it in ourselves. And so
Very, very well said, Robert. And this is exactly what Vivekananda says in his book, Raja Yoga. He has some clear discussion of how to develop and use these powers. But then he says, do it only under the guidance of an illumined soul. Otherwise, the risk of going astray is far too great. So you're absolutely right. What you said is right on. There's a question under the guidance of Sri Ramakrishna as to whether these powers are necessary for the evolution. He says no. They would be part of the kama house of life if you went through the normal brahmachari, grihastha, kama, and then moksha. So it's brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasin. The third house of life, the third fruit of life, is kama, satisfaction of desire. And this is the Vedic take on the progression of the soul. Sri Ramakrishna says, no, in this time, at the end of the Kali Yuga, go directly from brahmachari to seeking knowledge of God. In other words, brahmachari, the first stage of life, directly to moksha, the fourth stage. And he says, I will help you with that. I will share my spiritual treasure box with you, which is what Vivekananda was pointing toward when he said, if you're going to engage in this, you must have as your teacher one of the faces of the eternal teacher, an illumined soul. So thank you, Robert.
But I can see the advantages that it would afford you, because one of the things is, one of the most important things you have to do is be able to master that mind. And without that type of help, you're in a really awkward situation, because the mind is a powerful existence, and it will trick you and maneuver you in ways that if you had this power, it helps you to be able to slay it or to bring it under control and keep it there.
Well, this is the function of the teacher indeed. And this is why Swami Prabhavananda in this book says, just don't do this. Just don't go there. You don't need to. There's no obligation to do it. So Prabhavananda says, fortunately, very few people, very few individuals have the self-control and the mastery of their mind in order to do the samyama, the combination of concentration and meditation that is meant by samyama, in order to actually achieve these powers. He says it is very fortunate that so few have them. Within our recorded history, of course, there's that yogi who was a companion of the Queen of Russia, the Tsarina of Russia. I've forgotten his name now.
I think it's Rasputin.
Rasputin, exactly. Rasputin. He was one. Aleister Crowley is another. Gurdjieff was a master of these powers, but apparently he was also an illumined soul. So it wasn't an issue. But yeah, I don't know much about Gurdjieff. Just what I said actually. So, anything else from anyone before we read on? Thank you, Robert.
I have a question, Brother Shankara.
Yes, dear.
So you said something a minute ago about in the Kali Yuga, going from the brahmacharya phase to moksha. I didn't quite catch that. Well,
this is what Sri Ramakrishna says to do. The first stage of life is where we're, before age 30 approximately.
Right.
Where we're learning, how to play the game of life and, keep poverty at bay and, know how to deal with the world in a way. This is brahmacharya. So normally what happens is then you use this power, you use these skills that you developed in brahmacharya to have a successful householder's life. This is what most people do. And then you go on from that to retire from active participation in worldly life to the vanaprastha stage. Vanaprastha means forest dweller. And then that 25 years passes, and if you're still embodied, then you go to moksha. This is the traditional way. Sri Ramakrishna said, no, now, because the time is so short, and because we are so dependent on sensual stimulation, he used the metaphor of food, but of course, and food is one of the biggest ones. We're so addicted to this. He said, because this is such a strong force in our lives, and Robert was gesturing to it also, the mind being in the grip of these desires and so on. Sri Ramakrishna says, don't go to the grihastha stage, don't go to the vanaprastha stage, just go directly from the early years to seeking realization, seeking God realization, seeking to know God, as he says.
But this isn't what people do, though, right?
Well, that's not what most people do.
Right.
It's, and because the door is open and the invitation is always there, if you accept that invitation and take the hand of the eternal teacher, which is forever extended to you, if you take that hand and let it pull you forward, then it doesn't matter at what stage of life you do this. But it is the earlier, according to all of the swamis I've ever heard, the earlier we do it, the more auspicious in terms of our actual ability to do what is necessary to become a successful spiritual aspirant.
Well, that makes sense.
Yes.
Being that you mentioned Gurdjieff, he had a student, Peter Spassky, or something like that, and he wrote a book called
Uspensky, yes.
Uspensky, In Search of the Miraculous.
Yes.
Very good book. Highly recommend it.
Well, as I say, apparently Gurdjieff was an illumined soul, and so I'm not surprised that one of his students wrote a book, and I may have read that book so many decades ago that I don't remember anything other than the fellow's name is Uspensky.
If you read it, you would remember it.
Well, I have a vague memory of it.
Yeah.
But there were so many things I read in those days. Don Juan Matus had these yogic powers. I mean, he could foretell the future. And so he invested in stocks, and so never had to worry about earning a penny. He invested, he knew which stocks, he knew the future. This is what he told Castaneda, that he knew which stocks were going. He didn't say, anyway, this is what happened. So he didn't have to make any money in terms of working, and so was able to offer his services as a benefactor, as he called them himself, to his apprentices. But you just have to decide for yourself whether Don Juan Matus was an illumined soul. It certainly seems so from here. He and Don Gennaro showed all of the characteristics of an illumined soul, of illumined souls, as is portrayed in that book, Journey to Islam, which is a book I've read more recently. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I had I'm trying to reflect on an entire chapter 3, or the Vibhuti Pada. And it seems like the overall theme there is that you have to practice samyama, but when you practice samyama, you may get these powers and you shouldn't be distracted with these powers. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go back to the first chapter and Sutra number 12, which talks about Abhyasa and Vairagyam, which is practice and detachment. So if I try to apply that sutra to everything in chapter 3, it says practice or abhyas samyama, but do it in a detached manner so that you don't get entangled with all these powers.
Yes, exactly, Bhaskar. Your ability to make these correlations and go back is one of the real contributions you make to this class. That you do track these things and do this comparison and contrast, and come to these wonderful conclusions, which you just stated so articulately. Exactly. You do your practice. It's likely to have this result, but don't get entangled. Just like not to get entangled in anything else within the world of time, space, and causation. Thank you.
It makes me think about what Swami Prabhupada said in the Sermon on the Mount, where he's talking about the mystic union is the bedrock, and that, the point of life is God realization. And so, once you have that bedrock, or that, the God realization, then you have that guiding compass and that unshakable faith, which keeps you from getting sidetracked by these things.
Precisely.
And
Very well said, Bhagavan Das.
And also it makes you realize they're not necessary. They're just distraction.
Well, this is a conclusion that you would come to if you had the conviction that the goal of life is God realization, not dabbling anymore in any way with the things of time, space, and causation, except as is absolutely necessary to maintain yourself. So yes, exactly. Well said, well said, well said. Everyone who's contributing is doing making such wonderful contributions. Anything else before we go on to 42 and so on? Okay, please, Jeff, read on, and you can see how fruitful and productive what your reading is for us. And so thank you for reading it so capably.
It's my pleasure. So the next 3 sutras are grouped together. So starting with Sutra 42. By making samyama on the relation between the ear and the ether, one obtains supernatural powers of hearing. Repeating 42. By making samyama on the relation between the ear and the ether, one obtains supernatural powers of hearing. Number 43. By making samyama on the relation between the body and the ether, or by acquiring through meditation the lightness of cotton fiber, the yogi can fly through the air. Repeating 43. By making samyama on the relation between the body and the ether, or by acquiring through meditation the lightness of cotton fiber, the yogi can fly through the air. And 44. By making samyama on the thought waves of the mind when it is separated from the body, the state known as the great disincarnation, all coverings can be removed from the light of knowledge. Sutra 44 again. By making samyama on the thought waves of the mind when it is separated from the body, the state known as the great disincarnation, all coverings can be removed from the light of knowledge. Like Aphorism 39, this refers to the yoga power of withdrawing the mind from one's own body in order to make it pass into the body of another. In this state of withdrawal, the great disincarnation, the mental coverings composed of rajas and tamas dwindle away and the light of sattva is revealed. And that concludes the commentary.
Now, this business of, through practice, becoming light as cotton, Swami Prabhavananda's barber, Naren, Swami gave him that name, he was his disciple. Naren had the grace of being simply able to go into the Swami's room without knocking on the door. So one day he had come to cut the Swami's hair, and when he opened the door and went into the room, the Swami was sitting in a big armchair, about 4 to 6 inches off the chair. He wasn't sitting on the chair or in the chair. He was floating about 6. And his sevak, the Swami who took care of him, Swami Krishnananda, was standing behind him with his hands on his shoulders so that he wouldn't float any higher. This Naren told me himself. This is not hearsay or secondhand information. Naren told me of this experience himself. And of course, if you read the biography of Saint Teresa of Avila and certain other saints from other traditions, Rabia one from the Sufi tradition, they also developed this ability to float or fly. Saint Teresa of Avila found it very annoying because she would be lying on her bed in prayer and contemplation, and she would be unaware that she had floated up and off the bed and was bumping against the ceiling. And one of her sisters would come in and pull her down. And Teresa requested of her sisters that when they found her in this condition, to simply tie her to the bed so that this didn't happen. One of the reasons that she didn't want it to happen, if she had come to herself, come to her ordinary sense consciousness, floating against the ceiling, she would have fallen, and probably did on at least one occasion, and probably hurt herself slightly. So this is these are at least two instances. The instances about the instance, at least one instance, about Rabia and her other psychic powers is described in the book Love Poems from God by Daniel Ladinsky. So if you want to read about that, there's no reason for you to trouble yourself other than it's just a remarkable and marvelous book.
One other thing.
Yes, sir.
After last week's class, I was given a lot of thought, and something came up for me that's it's very radical, but I guess I'd like to share it with you guys. I was thinking in the Bible, it talked about Adam and Eve being in the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
And it also talked about we should not partake of the book of good and evil.
The book of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah. And I was thinking that maybe that was not figurative. Maybe that was literal, because if we do not partake of good and evil, then the pair of opposites would never exist, wouldn't come into play.
Well, boy, howdy, that's not radical at all. You have paralleled some of the most profound discussion of the rabbis who study Genesis. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, and Adam and Eve were naked, but that was no big deal. There was no, that was, so what?
Well, exactly. They didn't know.
Yeah,
they had no reason for shame. It says it right in the book of Genesis.
Yes, but if that statement was literal, was it saying to us that we should have remained that way without knowing, and without knowing our experiences, all of our experiences would be different than they would be after we know?
Well, this is exactly it. We did partake of the tree of the knowledge. We ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and so fell into duality. This is what's meant by the fall.
Yes.
We fell into duality. Now, what are we doing with all of our spiritual practices? Returning to unity, returning to the lack of duality. And duality, inherent in the very word itself, is the idea of entanglement. If there's this and there's that, well, you have to decide this or that. Immediately you're entangled.
Right.
So again, Robert, how well conceived and how well articulated. Yes, indeed, we fell into duality. We had reason for shame. And as it says in Genesis, now we had to work for a living. And we had to bear children in pain. And all of these things that come with the realm of duality. But somehow or another, this is the great curiosity, the great mystery. Somehow or another, we as the divine being, we all together as the divine being wanted this to happen. And this is what we'll talk about tomorrow morning. The title of the talk is Why, Oh Why, We Ask Why. Well, it's said very clearly in the Chandogya Upanishad that we as the divine being said, I am one. I shall body myself forth as many. And so Brahman's dream of duality began, of manyness. And as Adi Shankaracharya's guru's guru, Gauripada, said, in fact, nothing ever happened. It's all a dream. Waking consciousness is a dream just as much as dream awareness is a dream. And this is what Vivekananda points to again and again in his teachings, particularly in Jnana Yoga, the talks given, the collected as Jnana Yoga, and also in inspired talks. He just says, no one can convince me this is not a dream. Why? Because he knew perfectly well that it is a dream. And that when one wakes from it, as he had, you see that it is all a dream. And so it's incoherent and disconnected, and just like the things in our dream state. You know, if you analyze a dream later, you see none of that makes any sense. There's some very unusual dreams that are memorable, really truly memorable. They live in your memory. Swami Prabhavananda said those aren't ordinary dreams. Those are visitations. They are a psychic phenomenon rather than a dream phenomenon. So,
But it seems the deeper you get into it, it starts to seemingly make sense.
but a very different kind of sense, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. Great. That's what I was trying to say.
It's the sense given to us by the Atman. You know, it is the sense given to us by our profound inner being, the face of the eternal teacher that exists within each of us. That Saguna Atman, the witness, that is the face of the eternal teacher that exists in each of us. Though each of us is a mistaken way of talking, it certainly seems as if there's each of us. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, all of you. Anything else about any of these?
I just want to go back to what Robert was saying about Adam and Eve before they, read the book Good and Evil and all that, and how that they didn't realize they were naked. They didn't have any concept of that. And I was reading something this week about how Paramahansas surround themselves with children, because young children don't have, they don't recognize how wealthy their parents are. You know, being naked to a young child is just a natural state. It doesn't even come into their mind.
Right.
And that, really the purification of this process, returns us back to that state.
Which leads us, those of us who are bent this direction, to Joni Mitchell's beautiful song written for Woodstock. We must return to the garden. We must go back to the garden. I've forgotten the exact title, but it's a beautiful song by Joni Mitchell that she wrote to sing at Woodstock and then somehow never managed to get there.
The name of the song is Woodstock.
Oh, is it called Woodstock? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And the refrain is, we have to get back to the garden or something like that. And
we are stardust, we are golden, we are caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Thank you, Brahmadas. Would you repeat that, please?
We are stardust, we are golden, we are caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. That's the refrain of that song. One of my favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young songs, by the way.
Caught in the devil's bargain. That's exactly it. You know, that's a wonderful metaphor for this world of duality. our bargain with the devil, our bargain with the what Christ refers to as the deceiver or the liar. That's what he refers to in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion. He refers to, and in also a little bit in the Gospel of Thomas. So yes, the devil's bargain. We are caught in the devil's bargain. Anything else before we read on?
Yes, I just have maybe another observation on many of the sutras in this third chapter. It seems like all of them are dealing with samyama. So we're performing or practicing samyama, but the samyama is focusing on one or more of the tanmatras that we kind of looked at. So if you look at Sutra number 42, you're looking at ear, which is one of the Jnani Indriyas or one of the tanmatras, and you're concentrating on the relationship between ear and ether, which is a bhuta, an element, which is another of the tanmatras. And it's seemingly ether is related to power of hearing. So this is how you start gaining supernatural powers of hearing. I just have an extension there. Somewhere else, I've heard that when you do meditation and you do deep meditation, you start hearing the primordial sound or Om in many fashion. So I'm kind of extending that and saying, if you're actually doing meditation is nothing but samyama. If you're doing samyama on the ear and ether is the source of all the sound, maybe that's how you hear the primordial sound.
Very well observed. And Swami Prabhavananda said that for most spiritual aspirants, this clairaudience or enhancement of the ability to hear both the anahata sound, the unstruck sound of Om, and hear things at a distance was the most likely for most spiritual aspirants to manifest, simply because we are so dependent on our senses. And so he said, either clairvoyance or clairaudience. Clairvoyance is the ability to see things at a distance. Clairaudience, hear things at a distance, or hear the anahata sound, would be the ones that most likely arose. So you're very right, Bhaskar. Thank you.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
so my question is, why would anyone do any of this? I mean, why not just think of God?
Well, that's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Exactly. Well, this is because of the bent of your nature has led you to Sri Ramakrishna to be a disciple of Swami Sarvadevananda, who was the eternal teacher who comes down to us from the Ramakrishna lineage. And that's exactly the message. Why would you want to do any of this? Why do you want to continue with embodiment at all past the necessary of exhausting the karma that brought you into this existence? Know God and be free, as Swami Vivekananda says. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal of human life is to manifest this divinity. And so more power to us. And I think each of us here, in one way or another, whatever unique and wonderful way it manifests in you, has that desire to go beyond that which is ordinary and everyday and monotonous and entrapping, to go beyond. And so this is why this is such holy company, because everyone here, in one way or another, shares that aspiration. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Janaki.
One other quick question on Sutra number 44, the phrase that state known as the great disincarnation. Kind of wondering, is that a generally popularly used term, or what does it really mean?
Well,
Do you expand on it?
it's a term from Sankhya. So much of what Patanjali refers to is from Sankhya. Before there was incarnation, before there were bodies, there was mind. So mind is what created the bodies. So we can get back to this state where we leave the body behind and simply have a mind. This is what Adi Shankaracharya did when he was in this debate with a couple of householders who were very persuasive and had a huge following, saying that the householder's life was superior to the monastic's life. Adi Shankaracharya was debating with them. This was a standard technique in those days. And he was challenged by the wife of this couple to debate her on the subject of sex, that sex was one of the great compelling reasons to be a householder. And of course, being a young monastic, he knew nothing whatsoever about sex. So he asked for a month's break, a month's delay. She granted that. He went to his disciples, said, "Here, I'm going to put my body in this place. You take care of it. I'm going to leave this body. I'm going to disincarnate my mind and occupy the mind of a king who is just dying." And he did that. And so then there's a whole long story that goes with this, but to cut to the chase, he learned what he needed to learn, returned to his body, returned to the debate. The woman, having the great powers of perception herself, saw that he would be able to defeat her now in debate because of his knowledge, and so conceded. And so she, her husband, and all of their followers became Adi Shankaracharya's disciples, which was the agreement. If I win the debate, you and your followers become my disciples. If you win the debate, I and my followers will become your disciples. So this is the end of that story. But this is one example of disincarnation. There are others. Christ, of course, disincarnated himself for the 3 days that he was no longer occupying that body. Then he reincarnated himself, he resurrected himself, and went among his followers. And, he had all of the stigmata, all of the proof that this was, in fact, the body that had been crucified. And so that's another example of disincarnation.
Aren't we?
Wait a minute, Bhaskar, does that get it? Is that?
Actually, I just want to follow up with the fact that in 44, the sutra is saying you need to do samyama on thought waves, which in my mind is thought waves are the vrittis. So basically, you want to do samyama on vrittis, but you only want to do samyama when you actually attain the state of great incarnation, meaning you have separated the body, and therefore you're only able to look at your chitta and you're doing samyama on the vrittis. Is that
Precisely. The chitta has separated itself from the body, and you're looking at the thought waves in the chitta, absent the distraction of the senses. If you study the little appendix at the back of Swami Prabhavananda's translation, interpretation of the Gita, there's just a little, very excellently written appendix called the Cosmology of the Gita, which describes Sankhya philosophy. Not in every detail, of course, but the basic, the 24 cosmic principles. It talks about the 24 cosmic principles. And it isn't until we get to the end of those cosmic principles that we get body at all. There's no, the gross tanmatras, the gross manifestation comes right at the end. So we can learn to be without that gross aspect.
Actually, I'm liking it because it seems very logical and very quantitative and very almost mathematical.
It is. Oh, yes, indeed it is. Sankhya is intensely mathematical. If you look at the fullness of it, if you study it, it'll remind you of nothing so much as the periodic table, though there are only the three gunas as the elements of which things are made. So much of this guna, so much of that guna, so much of the other yields this. So the periodic table has more components out of which things are compounded, but it's exactly the same idea. It's exactly the same idea, and mathematically very intense. I recommend to anybody listening to the YouTube narration by Amy Call, AMYCALL, of her near-death experience. It is well worth your time, otherwise I don't think I would recommend it at all. And one of the things that she is given is this complete understanding beyond any ability of the left mind to interpret it into language, this complete understanding that this entire universe, this entire manifestation of time, space, and causation is made of mathematics.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, aren't we enjoying this life? And haven't we enjoyed this life? And could be that the whole purpose is to facilitate a situation where we can learn to do this. And after now at this point, we don't need the bodies. We've already learned how to do all of these things.
Precisely.
And the body assisted us in learning it.
Precisely. And that knowledge that you're talking about that allows us to enjoy that life at that meta level, that higher level, Sri Ramakrishna calls it vijnana, special knowledge. It's beyond jnana. It is vijnana. It is a special knowledge that allows you to understand, not just know and understand in an intellectual sense, but really know that everything without exception is the divine and is to be enjoyed.
Yeah. Life itself is an experience of it.
Yes, this
but
is
once you've experienced it, that's beyond the intellectual understanding of it.
Our problem is that we fell into the devil's bargain, which is attachment. Attachment. Instead of simply enjoying it moment by moment by moment, by moment by moment by moment, we get attached to this moment and say, I want more of this moment, or I don't want any more of that moment. And so then immediately we've fallen into the trap of what Bhaskar has been pointing to again and again, this business of generating vrittis. Generating vrittis. If we just simply experience life as Sri Krishna describes it as possible in the Gita, everything is smooth. Very few vrittis. We simply are, it's simply flowing in and flowing out, flowing in and flowing out, and we're not troubled by entanglement. But that's a very difficult state to achieve. Now, the great teachers say, I will give this to you. I will share what Christ said, I have overcome the world. And then he also said, come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And this is exactly what he's pointing to. And he says, if you do this, you will not taste death. Those who drink from my mouth shall not taste death. And you will come to that peace which passeth all understanding, which is that understanding that is of the spirit and not of the mind. Sri Ramakrishna says the same thing. Different words, same message. So we hear it from Sri Krishna, we hear it from Christ, we hear it from Sri Ramakrishna, we hear it, for that matter, from Patanjali. So every reason for us to take it seriously, which is, I assume, why we're all here this morning or this afternoon, because we do take it seriously. And that's why it's such a joy to be together, because we're with a bunch of people who take this seriously enough to spend their time doing this. Well, there's just a few minutes left, so I don't think we will take up any more sutras. The next one is 45, which I don't know if it's alone or is it with other sutras.
It's paired with the next one, so 2 sutras together, and then
42. So it's the end of the series and the beginning of another. Of 45 is 9, 46 is 1. So just quickly read what those 2 are. We don't have time to read and discuss the commentary, but what does the series end with, and what does the next series begin with?
Sutra 45, by making samyama on the gross and subtle forms of the elements, on their essential characteristics and the inherence of the gunas in them, and on the experiences they provide for the individual, one gains mastery of the elements. And 46 is, hence one gains the power of becoming as tiny as an atom and all similar powers. Also perfection of the body, which is no longer subject to the obstructions of the elements.
So if you become master of the elements, you become omnipotent. And so, of course, there's no obstruction to your omnipotence. So this is what it's pointing to. 45 says you become omnipotent. And then 46 says, and when you're omnipotent, this is what happens. So that's what we'll discuss when we start next week, if there's nothing else that anyone brings forward from this week. Anything else from anyone? This has been so exactly what this class should be.
This kind of relates to 42, and it's kind of a general meditation question. But when you're meditating and you're not trying to focus on your senses, and then some random something will happen and it'll make a noise or something, and it hits you so hard, and it's like 100 times normal, and you actually feel the wave, the thought wave. Is that an example of like in 42 that's unintentional?
Oh, absolutely. There's an example in Holy Mother's life of where she was meditating one time, and someone called her name softly. She didn't respond. They were outside the place where she was meditating. They called it a little bit more loudly, and she didn't respond. So they shouted her name. She actually screamed. It brought her out of meditation. And it was so painful, she actually screamed. And Sri Ramakrishna came running out of his room and said, "What on earth did you do?" And the person said, "Well, I did this, I did this, I did this." And he said, "Never, ever do that when someone is meditating. Never make that kind of." And this is one of the reasons that Sri Ramakrishna was he was averse to two things very identifiably: to monotony and to sudden sharp noises, because he was constantly in a state of meditation. So that's exactly it. And I'm sorry you had this experience. This is why we're advised to create a space where it is very quiet for us to practice our meditation. And that's why coming to a place like the chapel is so auspicious. I mean, you can create a place like the chapel. It was just a shrine dedication, not so very many days ago, over at Jim Pierce and Debbie Wiles's house, where they've created a space with special insulation and so on, so that it's a very lovely shrine room and very, very quiet. So anything else from anyone?
I just want to comment on Kenneth's observation. Typically, I think when you're meditating, you're trying to withdraw from at least specifically 5 of those tanmatras. And those 5 tanmatras are really the organs of perception.
Mm-hmm.
And the organs of perceptions are ear, skin, eye, tongue, and nose. So that's what you're trying to withdraw from while you're in meditation. And if there is a rude awakening, then that's what you felt.
Precisely. And we are also, as is pointed out in Pratyahara, we are also withdrawing from the organs of action, so that we don't. Our body is perfectly still, perfectly still. And this is why you should never touch a person in meditation either, because it suddenly draws their attention to their body, and it will be very jarring. Thank you, Bhaskar. Yes, indeed. So anything else from anyone before we close? What a delight. What a delight. So tomorrow morning, there's the last talk, this being a month for the study of Jnana Yoga. We will talk about the subject, why, oh why, we ask why, from the perspective of Jnana Yoga. So, I want to, for those of you who can take time, Swami Sarvapriyananda, as many of you already know, Swami Sarvapriyananda is coming here. He arrives July 7th and leaves July 10th. This is going to be the schedule. On July 7th, there will be a reception and potluck supper for the Swami here at the center. this would be the only opportunity really to have personal time with the Swami, although the Swami has not suggested that any interviews be scheduled. You know, he's a spontaneous man. So, but if you want to have his darshan, plan to come on the evening, probably at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Watch the newsletter or the website. And if you're not a subscriber to the newsletter, please do. But that'll update you. On the 8th and the 9th, a room has been booked at the Doubletree Inn, which is just down the street from the center, about 2 miles away, that holds 245 people. And the Swami will hold a retreat, a spiritual retreat, on those 2 days, the 8th and the 9th, on the Ashtavakra Samhita, one of the principal foundational scriptures of Advaita Vedanta. The Swami says it is his favorite of that kind of scripture. So the sessions, the registration will open. It's a free event, no charge. So the registration will open at 8 a.m. each day. You don't have to come both days, but I suggest you do if you decide to come at all. So the sessions will run from 10 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. There will be a break in the middle of the day for the Swami to rest and take a midday meal. The rest of us will be free to go find a meal at the local restaurants, of which there are many good ones very near the hotel. And there was a good one in the hotel itself, at least one in the hotel itself. So, but that's what's going to happen on the 8th and the 9th. On the 10th, the Swami, there won't be any opportunity to be with the Swami because he's going to just take breakfast here. He's going to spend his nights here at the center. So on the morning of the 10th, he'll take his breakfast and then travel away to wherever he is going next. As we know, the Swami is much in demand. So that's what happens next in terms of big Swami events. July 7th, 8th, and 9th with Swami Sarvapriyananda. His discourse will be on the Ashtavakra Samhita, and those who know the Swami and his teachings know that this will be well worth your attention.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
if you can attend, will the talks be recorded?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, great.
Yes. They will be videoed, and that video will go up on our YouTube channel and probably on New York's as well. You know, because the Swami is head of the Vedanta Society of New York. So, but it definitely will go up on our YouTube channel. So, yes, indeed. Any other comments or questions from anyone? All right, dears. Oh, dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain, which binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om, Amen. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. peace, peace. Peace and thy blessed beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. And may we go forward, secure in the knowledge that we are in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our mother and father. Hari Om Tat Sat, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Any last thought from anyone? All right. Until tomorrow morning, dears. See you then or sometime soon. And away we go.